Hi everybody. I want to talk to you today about freezer paper foundation piecing. I love to use freezer paper because freezer paper is waxy on one side and it's papery on the other side. That means you can draw on one side, and when on the waxy side, when you press your fabric to it, it stays exactly where you put it. Now there are two ways to make freezer paper foundations, and you can do that by either you can draw on each one, or you can, if you need multiples and they're all going to be the same, you can use a stitching method. So when I do this to make multiples, I take 4 pieces of freezer paper and I stack them waxy side up. And then I place my traced design on top, and I go to my sewing machine with a size 90 needle and a standard stitch length, and I just hole punch them. Why do I not make, say, 8? Because it's too hard on your needle, and also things can shift when you do that. So generally I only ever use 4. Now those of you that are doing your own design, you probably will not be making multiples of anything. So then you want to just trace it. So I'm not going to show you how to stitch that because I think you get how to stitch it. You stitch on every single line, and then I take my 1/4 inch foot and I put my 1/4 inch seam allowance on there. And so then once those are done, we are ready to sew. And today we're going to be making a flying goose strip. I've already made half of it, this half over here. And I'm going to make the other half now because I didn't actually want you to have to watch me sew all of those fabrics on there. So what I'm going to do right now, both sides of this strip are the same. I'm just going to trim this off. Whoop. And then now I'm ready to go on the other side. So we're going to use our mantra, which is press, trim, sew, do it again. Press, trim, sew, do it again. Press, trim, sew, do it again. And you do that over and over until you get to press, trim, sew, done. So what does that mean? It means PTSD. And that means press, trim, sew, do it again. Simple as that. So we'll set that aside. And the first thing we're going to do is turn on the iron so it's hot, which we forgot that part. And I'm going to take that first piece and I'm going to center it so that there's at least a 1/4 inch all the way around that piece, and I'm going to press it in place. I had a little cutting accident before we started doing this, so I actually accidentally lopped off the edge. So as soon as my iron heats up a little bit, I'm just going to take, in your first piece goes wrong side of the fabric to the waxy side of the freezer paper. And when you press that, it stays right there. There's no need ever to have to pin anything in place with foundation piecing, freezer paper foundation piecing. So I'm going to fold it on the stitching line, and I'm going to trim that edge, add a 1/4 on there and trim it. I'm going to come to the other side. I'm going to fold on that stitching line. And look at that. Boy, I really lined that up well, didn't I? So then we're going to take our background pieces. You can trim both sides at the same time. And then we're going to get our background pieces. And from here it goes fabric right sides together, raw edges together. And then we go to our sewing machine, and you want to turn your stitch length down to 1.5. You want a little tiny stitch because you want to make sure those stitches stay locked in place. And also because you want to punch little extra holes in your freezer paper so that when you rip the paper off, you actually don't rip the paper off, or don't rip the fabric. So we pressed, we trimmed, we sewed. Now we're going to do it again. And we're going to fold this over. I like to finger press them in place like that. And I'm just going to touch it lightly on the fabric side with my iron. And then I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to press it again on the paper side. See how that just stuck on there really nicely? And then I can line up this one over here. We pressed and now we trimmed. We don't have to trim because we pre-trimmed it, and we're going to sew. And I'm fussy about my threads. So we pressed, we trimmed, we sewed, we did it again. We're going to press that down. We're going to hold it and press it in place. Ta-da! Looking cute. Now we have to trim across the top because we have to add the next color. And we're going to take our next goose strip, which is red, and we're just going to line it up across the top, fabric right sides together, raw edges together, and we're going to sew across the top. And now we're going to press this in place, getting ready. So I always think of this as when I press, I'm getting ready for the next pieces that are going to come on. And we press, and then we're going to trim. And the only way I'm diverging from what the mantra is I'm going to trim both sides of this before I do any more sewing. And sometimes when your threads get caught in there, I just pop them out of there and then I'm ready to go. Now we have 2 more background pieces to go on. And here I still have to press because they're going to touch in the middle. But I don't have to trim because I can line up this piece with the edge of that red goose and it won't matter. Now, if you actually have a really dark background or goose fabric and it's going to shadow through, you, instead of just doing raw edges together, right sides together, you line them up that way and then you scooch the top over just about 3 threads. And that will take care of shadowing through, because there's nothing worse than, you know, making a whole block and then you find out that you have shadowing happening and you didn't notice it until you're all done sewing, because that's a real humdinger of a problem to get rid of. Okay, we're almost done. We're moving right along. Now we've got orange and red. You want to be careful not to touch your iron on that waxy part because it'll sure stick. And then it makes a mess on the bottom of your iron and then you have to clean your iron, which is not fun. So now we're going to just trim across the top, getting ready for the next goose. And we're almost done. And you can use steam or not as you wish. I tend to like to use steam, but my iron is an old tired iron, and sometimes all the water leaks out and then I don't like it anymore. And so here's a joke for you. Well, it's not really a joke, it's a piece of advice. What is the very best iron to buy for this? You know, when you're sewing, you want the best iron you can get, right? So that you don't have problems with it leaking or anything like that. And you want it to have automatic shut off or not. Well, here's my advice to you is the best iron to buy is the cheapest one you can get, because they're all going to wear out sooner or later anyway, and they all work about the same. So don't waste your money buying a hugely expensive iron. Yeah, that's the other reason I like freezer paper, because freezer paper, you know, it's cheap. It comes on a roll, 50 feet long, and you can buy it in the grocery store. So it's always good to have a resource like that. Now, once upon a time, Reynolds, which is the company that makes freezer paper, decided that they were going to, you know, because people don't usually use freezer paper to wrap meat anymore, they use those bags, you know, the freezer bags that you can buy to put their meat in. So there was a rumor that they were going to quit making freezer paper, which panicked me to no end. And I went out to all the stores in Albuquerque and I bought all the freezer paper I could buy, and making sure I would have my lifetime personal supply. You know, sort of like the people that go out and buy all the toilet paper right now so that they make sure they don't run out of toilet paper and that they have a 50-year supply in their house. But then, it wasn't long after that where freezer paper had a new box and a new label. And now what was on the front of the freezer paper box was crafting. So Reynolds figured out that those of us that use freezer paper for crafting, we're keeping that industry alive. So buy freezer paper. Buy a lot. Make sure you never run out. It's a good thing to have. I have currently in my house, well, I only have 2 rolls left, but I will have, sometimes I buy like 6 or 8 rolls at a time because I use lots and lots of freezer paper. And now, while I was telling you that little story and sewing right along, look at that. We're down to our very last piece. And I'm just going to line that up right there. This is another one of those pieces I whacked off. So I know it'll still fit, but that was a scary moment when I was trying to outsmart myself, and instead I undersmarted myself. And now we have half of a goose strip. I'm going to move this out of the way. Oops. Trim that. And now, because we're done, now if you are doing your own design, you probably don't have, unless you did this, you may not have a 1/4 inch seam allowance on the outside. And I will talk to you about that separately. But if you're making a pattern and there is a 1/4 inch seam allowance, we can just simply take any ruler and we can trim our seam allowances. And notice when I trim, I always put my pinky on the outside of the ruler. That prevents it from pivoting while I'm cutting. And it keeps it all lined up, although I didn't line that up very well. And we're just going to trim our piece here. And I'm going to trim off the bottom. And there we are. And now we have this. So, but what I wanted to show you, because everybody always asks how hard it is to take the freezer paper off. Because before I sew it together, like here, sew my background pieces on, I want to take off the freezer paper because once you stitch those lines in there, it makes it hard to get the freezer paper off. So what you want to do is you always start with the last piece that you sewed on is the first piece to take the paper off of. And so we're just going to peel. And then look at this, little tension, rip, little tension, rip, little tension, rip. Rip, rip, rip. So this is, you know, lots of times when I do this, I might have tons and tons and tons of strips to make. And I may piece a whole bunch at one. I sort of assembly line them. And then when it comes time to take the paper off, which is not my favorite job, then I put on a movie and I watch the movie and rip off paper. And so there is our piece here. And when we put our backgrounds on, they're going to go just like that. And just like that. And you're going to go back and you'll join these together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and a standard stitch length. And so this is, you know, Foundation Piecing 101 is actually the same no matter what your design is. I will work with you individually on original designs if you're doing stars or you're doing a different design, because there are different technical things you have to do differently, like a different order in which to piece them on. So thanks for joining me today as we talk about Foundation Piecing 101. Thank you.